Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last briefing of the week. Secretary Kerry met with King Salman, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Nayef, Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the foreign ministers of the GCC, Minister Elwood from the UK, and the UN Special Envoy for Yemen, Ismail Oud Sheikh Ahmed, in Jeddah to discuss a way forward to restart peace talks in Yemen with the goal of forming a unity government. During his visit, Secretary Kerry announced nearly $189 million in additional humanitarian assistance in response to the crisis in Yemen, bringing the total U.S. humanitarian assistance for Yemen to more than $237 million in fiscal year 2016. This contribution will help meet urgent humanitarian needs of the most vulnerable people in one of the Middle East's poorest and most food insecure countries, as well as Yemeni refugees in neighboring countries. As you've seen in the remarks that we just released on the transcript, Secretary Kerry emphasized that the bloodshed has gone on for far too long and needs to stop. We need to return as quickly as possible to a ceasefire that can lead to a permanent end of this conflict. Next, I'd like to welcome a group of 15 Afghan diplomats who are joining us today in today's daily press brief. We do extend our deepest condolences to them and the family and friends of those who were injured in yesterday's attack on the American University of Afghanistan. I think you've seen the Secretary's statement, which he also just released. We are committed to continuing our work to help the people of Afghanistan build a more peaceful, stable, and prosperous future, which our visitors today represent. This program, For the Room, provides entry-level Afghan diplomats with diplomatic statecraft training in the United States and in China. Yesterday, Under Secretary Shannon welcomed and congratulated these special guests on being selected for the program, which highlights the continued U.S. commitment to build a more peaceful and prosperous Afghanistan. We'd also like to thank and recognize the Chinese government for its partnership in sponsoring this program. Welcome to the briefing. And with that, Matt?
Right. What, the Chinese sponsor?
Yeah, it's a partnership that we have had with the Chinese for quite some years, working with the Diplomatic Corps of Afghanistan.
Okay, well, sounds interesting. Can we just start with a brief update on American citizens in 3 places?
Yes.
Afghanistan, in the wake of the attack, Italy, and Burma after the quakes. Can you give us a brief update?
Sure. I would say first for Italy as well as Burma, we continue to account for all U.S. citizens in those areas. We do ask U.S. citizens who may have been impacted to check in with family and friends on social media. We are pleased to say in Afghanistan that we have accounted for all U.S. citizens who are at the university, and we have no reports of any U.S. citizens killed or seriously injured in that attack.
Okay, and have either the Italians or the Burmese taken you up on your offer of
I have
assistance?
nothing to read out on that. We have extended our help. We stand ready to support.
Okay. All right, and then I was going to move on unless someone...
Let's do one more, American citizens.
Of course.
I think you will by now have seen the report that American Olympic swimmer Ryan Lochte is going to be summoned to return to Brazil to give testimony. This is different from an extradition request, and so I'm hoping you can actually perhaps comment on it, whether this has been raised to the State Department, whether there are any kind of diplomatic issues in the Brazilians seeking his return to offer testimony.
Okay, so we've seen those reports as well. Due to privacy considerations, I don't have information to offer. I would say, speaking broadly, we do encourage U.S. citizens, as always, to cooperate with law enforcement.
Okay. Do privacy considerations apply even for public figures, people who are clearly in the public domain already?
Privacy considerations apply to every U.S. citizen.
Okay.
Except me, because I'm standing up here right now.
Okay. Iran,
Yes,
a couple. One, in the Secretary's comments in Jeddah that you just referred to, he said the following. It's just 2 sentences. I'll read. "We were deeply troubled by the photographs which were shown to me early on by His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Nayef showing missiles that had come from Iran that were positioned on the Saudi border. This is obviously the Saudi border with Yemen. How early on were you guys shown that the Iranians were supplying the Houthis with missiles?
So I don't have a specific date to read out on that. What I would say is what we've said many times from this, which the Secretary points out, is, we're certainly not blind to Iran's activities, destabilizing, unhelpful activities in the region. In terms of a specific date, let me see if I can get that for you.
But isn't it the case that the supplying missiles or any kind of weaponry that that in your own words destabilize the situation, doesn't that draw U.S. sanctions?
So it's something that we continue to look at. Obviously, the Secretary has spoken to this. We are aware of this. We continue to look into it.
No, he didn't speak to whether it's sanctionable or not.
No, but
Is it
he
your
did speak to
understanding
our awareness.
Yeah. But
I would say I'm not going to get ahead of what would trigger a sanction on that, but I would say that we are looking into it.
but if it was early on.
Yeah, I just don't know the date on this matter.
Right, but I mean, okay, so this thing with the Houthis started early last year. Mm-hmm. And if you were shown photographs early on, presumably that means closer to when it started than now. And comments from U.S. officials between when it started and now have always been rather circumspect about the support that Iran was giving to the Houthis. This seems to indicate that you guys knew that the Iranians had supplied missiles to them early on, and I'm just wondering why a decision, or why there has been why there wasn't then, or still hasn't been a decision on whether this violates U.S. sanctions.
I would say we're looking into it.
Sanctions.
As the Secretary noted, we've seen those photos, and we're very aware of Iran's actions.
All right, and then the last one on the incident or incidents with the U.S. ships and the Iranian Navy. Do you know if the Secretary or anyone else, any other official, has raised this with your new in your new channels of communication with the Iranians?
I don't have any calls to read out today on that.
Okay. Do you know, or can you say whether there is going to be a diplomatic response to this, either directly or through the Swiss?
What I would actually back up a step and actually, say that, we are aware the 4 Iranian vessels approached the USS Nichi as it was transiting international waters in the Strait of Hormuz. We've also just now seen the reports of another incident that happened yesterday as well. The Department of Defense spoke to this some yesterday. We assessed the actions were unsafe. They were unprofessional. We don't know what the intentions of the Iranian ships were, but that behavior is unacceptable as our ships were in international waters. We believe that these type of actions are of concern. They unnecessarily escalate tensions. I would refer you to the Department of Defense, as this is very much in their lane in terms of further engagement.
With the Iranians?
In terms of how they would raise these concerns.
Well,
Isn't it
up to this building?
As I would say, I just don't have any calls or engagements to read out as of right now.
Well, but do you know if there are plans to, or is this something that you're just going to kind of let slide?
I have nothing to announce.
All right.
Arshad?
You said that the Department of Defense had spoken to this yesterday, but yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, were they not speaking to the prior incident?
I believe they were speaking to the Nichi incident, yes.
Yes. So, to your knowledge, they have not yet spoken to...
Not to my knowledge, but I think we saw the same reports coming in. I know they're aware of it, obviously.
And when you said that these actions, referring to the reports of the second incident plus the first one that DOD has confirmed, are a concern and unnecessarily raise tensions, therefore you're applying it to both the Nichi incident, but also to this other incident, even though you haven't confirmed it?
So the Department of Defense would speak to that. It's my understanding that both are being characterized as unsafe.
Okay.
Correct. Lalit,
I wanted to follow up on Afghanistan.
of course.
Afghan President Ghani today issued a statement after his National Security Council meeting in Kabul. According to the statement, he says the attack on the American University in Kabul was organized and orchestrated from Pakistan. The statement also says he called General Sharif, the Pakistan Army chief, and demanded that action be taken against those who were behind this. Do you know who were behind this, and what do you make of this statement?
So we can't comment on the responsibility for the attack. As we have in the past, we encourage the governments of Afghanistan and Pakistan to work together, not only in the wake of this attack and to ensure that such attacks don't happen again, but to increase their cooperation, countering violent extremism writ large. For your question, we have consistently raised our concerns to the highest level of the government of Pakistan on the need to deny safe haven to extremists. We have pressed the government of Pakistan to follow up on their expressed commitment, their stated commitment to not discriminate among terror groups, regardless of their agenda or affiliation.
So do you think Pakistan is not taking enough steps against these terrorist groups?
I would, again, and we've spoken about it from this podium, call your attention to what General Sharif himself has said, saying that they would not discriminate. This attack against the best and brightest of Afghanistan is a sign that we can all do more. Sir.
Disavow us, if you can, the idea that with the former secretary, there was a pay-for-play arrangement with Laureate University.
Okay, so we've actually spoken about this quite a bit, and there's been media reports and fact checks from a number of independent media outlets. As we've previously explained, the State Department is not aware of any grants provided directly to Laureate Education since 2009, though we are aware of some grants to educational institutions within or affiliated with the Laureate Education Network. I think it's also important to emphasize in recent weeks, Laureate Education has been conflated with an entirely separate organization, the International Youth Foundation, which is a nonprofit that funds international development initiatives. The International Youth Foundation, the separate organization, has received federal grants from USAID and state going back many years, both under Democratic and Republican administrations. Information about grants and contracts awarded by federal agencies is publicly available online.
And what about the idea, though, that the former secretary had, wanted them invited to a dinner here? There must have been something that she thought was key about what they were doing, in spite of some of the external criticism about the type of debt that they pile on students and so on. What was the value that the former secretary saw?
So I can't speak to the former secretary's thoughts. I can't speak to any specific invitation that was issued. But as we've said many times, the State Department regularly engages with a range of academics, NGOs, think tanks, business leaders, speakers, commentators on a range of issues. I'm just not familiar with this specific event that you're speaking of.
So we don't know, in your view, what the value might have been to have them to that dinner, because that's from the former.
Well, I just don't know the dinner you're speaking of. Lori.
Could you give us a readout of Secretary Kerry's phone conversation with the Turkish foreign minister, in which he informed him that the YPG was withdrawing east of the Euphrates River?
Okay, well, I can confirm that he did speak to the foreign minister. I cannot confirm that detail. It's my understanding they spoke broadly on the U.S. commitment to Turkey's security and spoke about the fight against Daesh and spoke about our bilateral relations.
The YPG initially protested that it wouldn't withdraw. Then the U.S. military spokesman for Inherent Resolve said that the YPG was withdrawing. Mm-hmm. And then there have been reports that the YPG is asking the U.S. for guarantees. Would you know what the situation is? Are they withdrawing, not withdrawing?
Well, I'd point you actually to their own statement, which they did release. we support them moving forward on their commitment. Their statement was very clear. I would note that the SDF has proved to be a reliable partner and a highly effective and capable force. It's seen most recently, as we spoke about, I think, yesterday in Manbij. It's important to note that Kurdish forces are a critical component of the SDF. We'll continue to support all components of the SDF, Arab, Kurd, Turkmen, all, as we look to pressure ISIL and ultimately liberate Raqqa.
Okay, and one final question.
Sure.
Could you provide more details about the agreement between the coalition and the SDF that they're now being asked to implement about withdrawing once they've, defeated ISIS in a certain area? Did Turkey? There is an agreement. People.
Well, I would just point to what the Kurdish commanders have said themselves.
I didn't. See that.
Well, we spoke about this yesterday. That they've made the commitment as that these areas are liberated from Daesh. That it'll be local leaders, local forces who will move in and stabilize.
And did Turkey agree to that understanding?
I would direct you to the Turks to speak to their commitments. That was, sir. I'm happy to do this, you guys. It's last brief of the week, but
Yeah, I'm Julian Porter from The Guardian. In the wake of the chemical weapons report yesterday, what does the US want to get out of the UN Security Council meeting next Tuesday in terms of outcomes, in terms of enforcing the Chemical Weapons Convention?
okay. But we would never preview our actions within the Security Council. What I would say is that the administration will continue to pursue all appropriate legal and diplomatic options to hold accountable any individuals, entities, groups, or governments responsible for the use of chemical weapons in Syria.
So on Syria?
Yep.
Just in terms, and on meetings?
Yep.
It looks like there might be, or there has been some progress, at least on the Aleppo situation in terms of the 48-hour pause and getting humanitarian aid in, with the Russians having agreed to this now. Is this something that you think is going to be finalized tomorrow in the meetings in Geneva? And whether it is or not, aren't you looking for something more broad than just Aleppo?
We are. I would disconnect the conversations the UN is having about these 48-hour ceasefires from the talks tomorrow in Geneva. But you're exactly right. We do support, however, the UN's efforts to bring much needed humanitarian aid to all parts of Aleppo city. It's the UN, as we've said many times, who determines which areas need aid, how they get aid, how that access happens. Given the UN's technical expertise and knowledge on the ground, it's the UN and its partners, as I said, who need to determine who's in need and how aid's delivered. It's our understanding they're still engaging with all partners and trying to determine the mechanics and the logistics on that. If the UN says they need 48 hours, of course we support the UN, but as you point out, our focus is on a nationwide, sustainable cessation of hostilities that will provide the access needed so the Syrian people can get the aid they so strongly deserve.
Okay, and so it's the much broader proposal that is the main topic of discussion tomorrow.
In Geneva, we have a number of things, as we spoke about yesterday. We're very focused, obviously, on the cessation of hostilities, yes, on wide humanitarian access, and yes, creating the grounds for a political transition.
Okay, thanks.
Did you have another question, Matt? I feel like if it did, I'm forgetting it, but hi.
I'm forgetting it too then.
But that's okay. I'm sure it was pithy.
Pithy.
Nice seeing you.
Story News. Nice to speak to you. So I think in South Sudan there's some need in the region for some clarification on a statement that John Kerry made a couple of days ago in Nairobi. I just wanted to focus on the bit of the statement that he made that will help us. He said, relating to Riek Machar, the exiled former vice president, legally under the agreement there is allowance for the replacement in a transition of personnel, and that has been effective with the appointment of a new vice president. So in the previous phase of the South Sudanese crisis, there was a lot of emphasis on having Riek Machar come back into that job. Has that emphasis shifted in the eyes of the State Department?
So I'd reiterate what the Secretary said. It's up to the South Sudanese to decide on their political leaders in compliance with the peace agreement. The peace agreement contains procedures and requirements that govern transitions and changes within the transitional government. Specifically, the agreement provides that, and I quote, the top leadership of the armed opposition, end quote, has the power to nominate a new first vice president if that position is vacant. I'd speak more broadly. We do expect the transitional government and all parties, including all leaders of the opposition in South Sudan, to take every step possible to avoid fighting and to reach a peaceful resolution of their differences. The way forward is not through violence or military action, but through implementation of the agreement and through peaceful resolution of differences. We'll continue to engage with all parties in South Sudan as we have been, including the government and opposition leaders, to support peace and the implementation of the agreement. Sir. Of course.
Another topic, and I should have identified myself. Chad Pergram with Fox. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
On another subject here, has there been any communication with Capitol Hill, with Congress coming back to session in the next week and a half, about the Secretary going to appear before the House Oversight Committee or other committees to talk about the Iran deal, the so-called ransom, quote unquote, and also the email situation with former Secretary Clinton?
So yeah, I don't have any appearances to announce at this point, but certainly as a former senator, the Secretary takes very seriously our responsibilities to Congress. I just don't have anything to read out.
There was some suggestion from some sources I had spoken with this week that there had been an effort. Of course, Congress hasn't been there in 7 weeks, but they had tried to get him in before. I know he's had some travel and things, but there was some thought that there hadn't been, at least from those sources, as much cooperation as they would like.
I would dispute that. I think our colleagues, certainly here in the room and around the world, know that Secretary Kerry is very committed to engaging as appropriate, and will continue to do that. Arshad, you added more.
Yeah, on the Philippines, I think you may have had a chance to see these comments by Philippine President Duterte regarding Philippine Senator Leila de Lima, who has criticized the increase in extrajudicial killings of alleged drug traffickers or people involved in the drug trade. And President Duterte on Thursday essentially verbally attacked the senator, saying, "You are finished," handing out a diagram purportedly showing links between officials and politicians and big drug dealers, with the senator at the top of that list of alleged webs or alleged connections. Do you have any concerns that Duterte is not taking seriously the concerns you've expressed about all these killings, and that in fact he's attacking a legislator who is also raising doubts about these killings?
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
So I'd say a few things. As we've said both publicly and as we've engaged with our very good partners, the Philippines, we've spoken about these reports of extrajudicial killings. As we noted, I think just maybe earlier this week or last week, we're very deeply concerned about these reports by extrajudicial killings by or at the behest of government authorities, of individuals who are suspected to have been in drug activity in the Philippines. We have also made our concerns known. The United States believes in rule of law. We believe in due process. We believe in universal human rights. And we believe that these support long-term security, which is the goal not only for the United States, but also for the Philippines. We strongly urge the Philippines to ensure its law enforcement efforts comply with human rights obligations. In terms of the exact comments of the president, I'm going to refer you back to the government of the Philippines. to better understand perhaps what President Duterte.
Well, but you have been very explicit about your concerns with this
We
country,
have.
which you describe as a very good partner. In fact, it's a treaty ally. Just this week, you made clear those concerns yet again. And in the same week, the president is attacking domestic legislator raising the same concerns. Do you think he's taking your concerns seriously?
I would say that we continue to engage with the government of the Philippines on our concerns privately as well as from the podium and raise those. I understand your question. It's hard for me to characterize, how seriously they take that. We continue to raise it. We think that our relationship, which spans 70 years, is a frank and open enough relationship that we can have those conversations.
Longer than that, if you
Yes,
consider
it's-
U.S.
Thank
colonial
you.
rule.
Well, yes, thank you. Lala?
On
Of course.
Afghanistan, has this special representative for Afghanistan, Pakistan, reach out to his counterparts in Kabul after this attack?
I don't have a call readout to do that. I would say that our embassy in Kabul has been very close in touch with our colleagues in the Afghan government. I just don't have a readout from our special representative.
And when did he last travel to Afghanistan?
I actually don't know, Lala. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.